Welcome back to Conversations for Change, a podcast by the Nurturing Tomorrow Foundation. Today, we're joined by Fred Bullock, co-founder of Irregular, a workplace neurodiversity training organization. Fred's story of discovering ADHD in adulthood sparked a passion for helping organizations create environments where neurodivergent people, and really all people, can thrive. As always, a quick note, we are not mental health professionals. This podcast is for educational and advocacy purposes only. Everything we share reflects our personal perspectives and lived experiences. If you're struggling or need support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast Conversations for Change. Today, we're diving into a topic that is close to my heart. And honestly, at the center of so many conversations. How do we create spaces that every brain can thrive? Our guest, Fred Bullock, knows this question inside out. After his fast-paced career in sales, Fred discovered in his 30s that he had ADHD, a revelation that reframed his entire view of work, mental health, and leadership. Fred, I am thrilled to have you here. So let's just jump right in. Let's go right to that moment that maybe not when you received the diagnosis, but what led you to get there?
Towards the end of my 20s, I'd been working in sales for quite a long time. I didn't mean to get into sales, like everyone who works in sales.
I can relate.
I wanted to be a rock star when I was a kid.
Me too. I wanted to be an actress, but same thing, rock star lifestyle, yes.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to be, and I didn't really care about anything else. But then I got to the age of about 23 and I was broke, and it was starting to become clear that I probably wasn't going to become a rock star in the immediate future. And I had to get a job. I didn't have any qualifications. I didn't really have any marketable skills because I dropped out of kind of education when I was about 19. And the only thing I really could do was get a job at a very kind of disreputable telesales, telemarketing operation. But I was kind of able to do well enough at it using my natural skills, I guess, and my personality, that after a few years, I ended up at a company called OpenTable, which I know you guys know quite well in America. And I became a kind of full-blown sales guy, like field sales guy with, a big salary and earning loads of commission and with a lot of responsibility. And it was absolutely brilliant to start off with. But then when I was in my late 20s, my daughter was born when I was about 27. And suddenly all of this pressure, the pressure went up massively, just from the realization that I was a dad and I was responsible for a person. And the pressure of the job, which had started pretty much at that exact time, started to really kind of go up as well. And everything kind of came to a head, and I started struggling a little bit with quite a lot with my mental health. And it wasn't just that I was struggling with my mental health. It was just that there felt like there was so much riding on it. Like when you become a father, it's kind of like, I need to do well at this job because otherwise my kid isn't going to be able to eat, or I'm not going to be able to have a shelter over my head. And it was big, and I couldn't deal with it very well. So anyway, I started going to therapy. I was doing this job at the same time, bringing up a small child with my wife. I wasn't doing it all by myself. And when I was in therapy, after a year or two, the therapist said, "Have you ever thought you might have ADHD?" And I was like, "No, that has never occurred to me one time in my entire life." But I went away and I started researching it. And as I'm sure you guys may have had a similar experience, you go through the list of oh my God, this explains everything.
All the way back to childhood.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, right, okay, right. And so that kind of triggered the path, which ended up a couple of years later with me getting diagnosed.
That same thing happened with me with my autism diagnosis, where, I met my wife now about 11 years ago, and a couple of years in, she goes, at this point there was Asperger's was still a diagnosis, and my wife says to me, I think you have Asperger's. And I was like, no, that's literally never crossed my mind ever. And I remember we were in the car, her parents were driving, we were going somewhere, we were in the back seat, and I pulled it up on my phone and I was like, oh no, like there's no question to be asked based on this list. Like I don't need, and then I don't know. I almost became like angry at that point in a way because I'm like, I've been to so many doctors talking through depression, anxiety, everything else. I'm like, how did you guys not see this? Like, it's so crystal clear to me. So I totally feel, I know exactly how you feel when you looked at that list and said, huh.
What were some of those like aha moments when you got the diagnosis and you started to look back? Like, are there any in particular that stand out to you?
The thing that was, internally causing me a lot of trouble at the time was this perception that I was a bit self-sabotaging. There were lots of things like in my life where I didn't make it easy for myself, with my lifestyle, what I'd get up to at the weekend, but not just that, like kind of how I'd, sometimes it almost felt like I was looking for trouble or like looking for difficulty with work, like trying to find points of friction, taking a stand over something pretty insignificant because I was bored, and causing loads of drama for myself and other people. But I think, looking back, when I was a kid, the narrative of my childhood was Fred's really capable. He's really bright. If only he could, apply himself. If only he could. And that was like the narrative throughout my entire childhood because I would be very good at things immediately because they'd interest me. And I'd be able to just, dive right into it and hyper-focus and, get really good results to the point that people would be like, oh my God, like, Fred's like some kind of genius or something. But then a week later, I would have completely lost interest in it. And, someone will give me a straightforward task to do. And I just be like, nah, I'm not doing that. That's not happening. So there was this constant kind of frustration in teachers and parents. And I think it, from an early age, it kind of built this thing into my head that I'm like, I've got two parts to me. There's this part of me that should be, going to the best universities in the land, inventing things, finding amazing discoveries, setting insanely high expectations for myself. But then there was this other part of me that's like, but I've got this devil inside me that will always prevent me from doing that. And it created a lot of conflict going into my 20s. And I think it's all okay if you're just doing a fairly easy job and you haven't got a child. But I think those two things suddenly, like, the pressure goes up and it's like, I'm not coping. I think the key thing for me was I remember reading this description of the kind of physical element of ADHD, which is your prefrontal cortex, which controls your executive function and how what you decide to do and planning and things like that, and the dopamine delivery to that prefrontal cortex. And I was like, I get it. That makes so much sense. I'm in this constant state of understimulation. That explains the low mood. That explains the kind of seeking stimulation, whether it's positive or negative.
I think Fred and I are twins.
I was going to say the same thing you wrote. I was like, Fred, you're literally speaking my language. Like, I am feeling like you are speaking directly to my soul. I want to ask really quickly, have you read the book about dopamine addiction called Dopamine Nation?
No, I haven't. I think I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
Highly recommend if you're just like looking for a read. I want to throw that out there. Yeah. I want to really take this conversation into a different direction. And we've learned about how this discovery, understanding your ADHD brain. And I want to focus that lens on what you're doing at Irregular.
So yeah, Irregular is an organization that I founded with an old friend of mine called Andy, who I went to college with. Well, college for us in the UK is like 16, 17, 18, rather than kind of what we call university. And we were really good friends, but we kind of just drifted apart. And but I did a LinkedIn post recently, which was related to neurodivergence at work, which he responded to, and we got back in touch. And in typical kind of neurodivergent fashion. Just it was literally like we'd had no gap in our relationship whatsoever. We just got on a Zoom call and just started having a Zoom call every week from then onwards. But I think the thing that really drives me, and I know it drives Andy as well, is when I understood that the way that I acted and what I experienced was down to my brain. And I'm not completely removing personal agency there, but to a great degree, the way that I kind of operate is down to the physical brain that's in my head. It made me, I mean, the first thing was that I just let myself off the hook big time. A lot of the self-criticism and the self-flagellation kind of hasn't completely gone, but, you know, I was able to let myself off the hook and start not beating myself up for not being able to do certain things, for not being this kind of all-rounder who could do everything. I started to understand that the things that I could do really well, I pay for that, and the things that I can't, I'm very, very bad at, right? And that's just the way my brain works, and that's the way everyone's brain works. If you're particularly good in one area, there's going to be something that you're not so good at somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by this point, I'd been working at, you know, pretty big organizations for a long time. And I started to really notice this trend towards standardization and one size fits all in the way that organizations, for want of a better phrase, organize themselves. And particularly the way that they manage people and the way that they create this employee experience. And I started to see that that's a big reason why neurodivergent people struggle at work. But the thing is that I really feel that it's also not good for the organization. The more I thought about it, you know, I was a pretty successful salesperson, and I've done, despite troubles, I've done pretty well in my career. And I just started to see all these areas where there were just unnecessary barriers being put in place that didn't just make it harder for neurodivergent people to kind of fully invest and give their best, which surely is what every company wants. It's also making it difficult for kind of everyone. It was suboptimal for everyone. And that's the thing that really drives me and Andy, where we are a neurodiversity training company, but we don't approach it from a kind of the moral argument. We don't approach it from, look, this is the right thing to do for neurodivergent people. We approach it from the perspective of the way that neurodivergent people struggle in many organizations is a sign of what needs to change about those organizations to be better for everyone and to allow everybody to participate more fully. And that's going to be better for the individual, the organization, and for society as a whole.
That's amazing. First and foremost, I love the work that you guys are doing, because as a neurodivergent adult, it's hard when you go into an organization, you hear these presentations from the top down, and they want kind of everybody to act the same way and look the same way, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm a consultant, and, most of my colleagues are, wearing button-up shirts, depending on the event, suit and tie. And I hate that. I hate that. I feel so uncomfortable. It's all I can think about when I'm in those clothes. And so most of the time I'm wearing a sweatshirt, Nurturing Tomorrow sweatshirt right now. And this is what I'm usually wearing because I'm comfortable. And I know when I need to put on my button-up shirt, what meetings it's most important for. But, nobody has really advocated within the workplace for items that improve my comfort more than I have. And I think having you guys help organizations understand at a broader perspective what makes everybody happier, work better, et cetera, I think is super important. And especially since, at least in the States, with school kind of sets you up for that one size fits all type thing. To what you were talking about before, when you were in school and you find that item you're super interested in, you hyper focus on it. There's not really a place to set us up to find those items to hyper focus on and be really good at, as you finish school, as you go into university, et cetera, et cetera. It's really lets everybody learn the same way, learn the same amount of, or at the same level across different topics. And if you get bored, then you get bored. And at least for me, when I got bored, I got kicked out of class. So I love the work that you're doing. And it's so funny because Victoria and I have had conversations about doing something similar-ish in the States, but also looking at schools because it's, root cause. If you can help develop people with a strong focus on their most important topics or whatever, then you can create some really strong adults, some superhero adults. So, and I will add, this crossed my mind before and I didn't say it at the time, but hearing the story about you and Andy is so similar to Victoria and I, because Victoria and I met, what was it, Victoria? You always remember the date, like 10 years ago-ish?
Yeah, I can tell you the hour. No.
No.
It was 2018 is when we met. Yeah.
So we met in 2018, kind of went our separate ways. And then Victoria posted something on LinkedIn about the school project. And I said, we need to reconnect. And it was the same thing. We hopped on a call almost immediately and kept hopping on calls. And then it was like, well, what are we going to do here?
Andy, hearing you talk about redesigning today's workplace, really for me, especially as a current grad student and as someone who's a lifelong learner, and then also hearing what you said, it's so crazy because that point of discovery for me, getting that diagnosis, was because of a really amazing person in a registrar's office who was not a mental health professional, but is also a fellow Divergent and an adult with ADHD who was just looking at my transcript and trying to figure it out. He was like, man, like you are just really excelling in some of these classes. Like you're making these really high marks. And he was like, but what's happening over here with these? And I'm like, well, like I just can't pay attention. I can't go. I'm bored. And without, giving me a diagnosis himself, he really pushed me to go, seek, to utilize the school's resources. And that's exactly what I did. So with that being said, I want to know how you see these ideas really influencing, our children as a mother and yourself as a father and a parent and just concerned citizens of humanity. How do you see the ideas that you guys are really implementing today, and how we prepare kids and young adults for jobs and educational opportunities ahead?
Well, I think it's really interesting what you just said about how this person was noticing that you were really excelling in certain areas, but then saying, hey, what's going on over here? And I think that often in school and you get it in work as well, there's this received wisdom or this idea that it's about looking at what the person's weak at and like, hey, come on, we need to do something about this. I think especially with neurodivergent people, and possibly with everyone, it's you get more bang for your buck from letting people work on their strengths and follow their strengths than trying to make out that everyone can be an all-rounder, because that's just not realistic. You don't get people who are equally good at everything, And especially when someone, especially as I've said already, like if someone's especially good at one thing, inevitably they're not, there's going to be another area where they're not as good. Like for example,
yes,
me, my interpersonal skills, my kind of verbal skills, my energy, my ability to to kind of understand concepts really, really quickly, they're all quite high percentile, but then I'm very, very disorganized. My attention to detail is pretty low. And it's kind of like, if you want the best of me, you have to accept the worst of me. I think there's a quote by Marilyn Monroe. It's something along those lines, like, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve to have the best. Mm-hmm. But I think this is something which is really interesting, because there seems to be this prevalent idea in work and in school where it almost seems like it's a hangover from the industrial age, like the industrial revolution, where it's kind of like factories. It's like, we want to produce this outcome. And in order to get this outcome, we must control the process as much as possible. And if things start going wrong with the outcome, the answer is we need to control the process more. And I think that this gets I'm pretty sure that the education system was founded upon this idea. It's like, right, we're going to produce people who will then take part in the world of work. And at that, in the world of work, mostly manufacturing, like manufacturing things and producing things or mining or taking things out of the earth. The nature of work is completely changed, of course. But yeah, this mentality of like, we want the outcome. Let's really sweat and control the process in order to get that outcome is still very prevalent at school and in the workplace, in my opinion. But the problem is that in a factory you can control the environment. In the real world, you can't control the environment, and in fact, the environment is chaotic. The environment changes rapidly. It's extremely dynamic. Like if you imagine a business, other competitors that come into the market, they've got no control over that, got no real control over the fluctuations of the economy, kind of geopolitical things that are happening. So I think that what we need in this world is people who have lots of different skills, not all in the same person, right? We need lots of different skills, we need lots of different experiences, different perspectives, and we need people that are adaptable, and we need organizations that are adaptable and can change. And I think that this model of trying to produce these excellent workers that then go out into the world and kind of produce things, it doesn't make sense anymore.
You said something in there, and I forgot exactly what the wording was that you used, but in the workplace, when you expect everybody to kind of do the same thing or produce the same quality or kind of just be those little worker bees getting their job done, you said like adjusting what that looks like could be good for everybody. And I completely agree, because for a neurotypical, let's call it non-ADHD, right-minded person, yes, they may nod their head and do everything, but they may not be happy doing it. That turns to, low quality, turnover, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas for neurodivergent folks or ADHD folks, or if you have both, then you physically can't do those other things. You cannot get your mind to slow down and focus enough on that one topic, because on your side screen you see the 5 other things you need to work on, and something else is shinier and prettier and cooler to work on, and gets that dopamine rush that we've been talking about. So it's like if you change kind of the mindset again from the top down, it doesn't help just the neurodivergent, just the ADHD. It helps everybody.
Let's say that the way, because I worked in sales, like the way that a sales team is targeted and what they're asked to do in terms of kind of administration and connecting with different parts of the company, that can be very, very particular. It can be very intense. It can take up a lot of people's time. And I think a lot of salespeople have ADHD. But you're right in that the people that are neurodivergent, they're the ones that literally can't do it. They're like, I cannot do this and I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to do it, but it's going to cost me so much in terms of energy. But you're absolutely right. Like it's probably suboptimal for everybody, right? But other people are able to kind of go, all right, I'm going to make myself do it, right? It's not going to cost me too much. So I think that's a really way of doing it. And that's really a big part of mine and Andy's work, is that neurodivergent experience is kind of like, the expression, the canary down the coal mine? When you use the phrase, the canary down the coal mine, it's like, that's the thing that tells you there's a problem. And I think that the neurodivergent experience, when neurodivergent people are really struggling with something, the response shouldn't be, right, we need to find some way of accommodating this person and, giving them. special treatment. The approach should be, what does that tell us about the process? Is that a sign that the process is not good for everybody?
That's so big. And to go back, taking it back to a younger self, thinking about, oh man, like I needed, even though, they just weren't diagnosing in the 90s, they were not diagnosing little girls with ADHD. And I was not a hyper child, but I needed extended time. I needed to be in a controlled environment for testing. Like the back of someone's head is way too distracting for me. And it has nothing to do with them. It's got everything that's going on with me. But asking for those accommodations was so frightening to me because it set me apart and not in a fun way. And it was very isolating. And I think feeling this way, yesterday we were having a conversation and we were talking about how sometimes ADHD could feel like being on a really lonely island. And, I had to that point, I said, feeling unique or being unique in that sense can be a very lonely place. And to speak to what you just said, like making those accommodations for everyone, not giving special, because it's not about asking for special treatment, and I think that was huge.
Feeling like you're on an island by yourself. You were talking about it before, Fred, with, sales and you had your daughter was born and you're married, but like in your head, it still felt like you had so much responsibility. You had so much to get done. And even though you have your wife, it still seemed to feel to you that you had to figure it out. You as an individual by yourself had to figure it out. And I think that's typical for a lot of folks where it's like, I don't know I haven't done enough research to understand exactly how our brains work here, but it like, at least for me, it feels like a puzzle of sorts where it's like, oh, this is going wrong, or I haven't hit my quota, or I haven't hit this deliverable. And I need to figure out the puzzle to solve for that and get it done. And I don't know. It's hard for me to ask for help.
Yeah. Sometimes I think of the example of sports teams, and really, the top end of sports teams. And I'm not saying organizations are able to do this for everyone, right? But it's an interesting idea. The top end of sports teams will be thinking about the individual characteristics of each person on their team, not just in terms of the different skills they bring to the table, which of course is also a great analogy, right? You need different types of people, different skill sets, different physical characteristics. But, how long do they take to recover? What's their personality like? How should I deliver feedback to them? All of these things will be taken into account in order to create a truly high performing team. And you often see best performing teams were the ones where there was a coach who had amazing human skills and really knew how to give each person what they needed to be able to thrive in that team. So it's such a big part of high performance. I think a lot of the time, kind of accommodating for neurodivergent people or any kind of accommodation can be seen as almost anti-growth or anti-performance, like something that but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's literally the same thing. If you want people to perform, find out what conditions they need to perform and help them get those conditions, your whole company's going to perform better.
With your work at Irregular or even throughout your career, have you seen with leaders specifically, have you gotten through that hump of apprehension where it's like getting them to realize that putting some extra effort, some extra time with certain individuals is worth it? Like, and I ask this from the sense of like, I think about my workplace and on my project team, I have someone from the West Coast and who's 3 hours behind me, and he's been stuck working East Coast hours. So he could log in at 6 or 7 a.m. his time in the morning. And I know, speaking for myself, I wouldn't like that. So what I try and do with folks on my projects is like understand what gets them to tick, understand working preferences, communication preferences, feedback preferences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I spend some time doing that. We don't always have the time. We got to kick off a project to move quickly. And, that's something that's potentially going to slow us down. But I've always been the type of leader that believes heavily in like putting the extra time in for your team, because if your team succeeds, then you all succeed. You're successful at the end of the day. Have you ever had any of those aha moments with your work?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with lots of different managers, and the approach that you just outlined there, that just seems like common sense, doesn't it? It seems logical. It seems like
yes.
the best out of these people, like that benefit. It's almost like it's not even. I'm sure that there is a big element of compassion and selflessness, but even if you were completely self-interested, that would still seem like the most logical thing to do, right? Because then that reflects well on you. I've had some great managers, and there's loads of brilliant people out there who I think probably naturally do what you just did without even thinking about the concept of neurodivergence. A really great manager I had called Sasha, who was my manager, the longest I've ever had a manager for. And he was brilliant at that, and he still is to this day. Like, he gets to know each individual on his team, and he really sweats. How do I communicate with this person? What do they need? How do I motivate them? What levers can I pull? I think so. I've spent a lot of time as a sales trainer, and often when you're a sales trainer in a big organization, there's this kind of machine-like thinking where it's like, right, we need to just get people through the process, and we need them to get them to the point where they're making their first sale as quickly as possible. If they can't deal with the training, then they can't deal with working here, right? And my mentality was always, if this person can't handle the kind of online training, or they don't understand this aspect of it, let's find out how this works for them. Let's find out how they connect with this. And I had a lot of success with people that had been written off by other parts of the organization by trying to kind of meet them where they were at. So I think that it's often seen as something which is kind of prohibitively time consuming. It's kind of like, look, we've got this process. We can't stop the process for anything, right? We can't give this person special treatment. But actually, when you're willing to slow down a little bit, I think in the long run, you're a lot faster, and you're a lot more efficient, and you're a lot more effective.
Absolutely. And I think within organizations, a lot of times they're thinking about those, short-term goals. To your point, let's get this person in, goal 1, get them through training, goal 2, get the first sale, goal 3. And they're thinking about those little goal or short-term goals versus the long-term. What's the long-term? Well, we want this person to be a successful salesperson who's trying to sell so much and develop the team and grow the team to have extra, more people that perform as well as they do. And, maybe they get great management skills and can support a sales team themselves doing just the same thing. And like, that's kind of the long-term goal that it takes time to get there. And I feel like, I don't know, at least for me, it feels like in the workplace, sales, not sales, doesn't really matter. That sense of thinking is missing. I think organizations are thinking about it at the organizational level. We want to hit this much in sales. We want, this much in revenue, whatever. But I don't think they're always thinking about it at the individual level.
I tend to think of it kind of like the goldfish, when I'm thinking of people and situations where, you're keeping someone in this small glass bowl, essentially. That fish is going to stay super small. I know this is going to sound like it's so cliche and corny, but you take that goldfish out of that tiny bowl that you got at the fair and put it into a tank, or, even a larger tank, or, it's the size changes. And I think
I know.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's a really good analogy, because it's like when variation is the enemy, right? When you minimize variation, you may succeed in avoiding the absolute troughs, but you sure as hell succeed in avoiding the highs as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, you're like, nothing can vary. We must, everything must kind of go like this, steady and predictable. Yeah, all right, you might avoid disasters, but you also avoid the most amazing possibilities as well.
I think, I get it. From an organizational standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, variation can be scary because it's harder to forecast when there's variation. But I also think there's typically some folks aren't thinking about it correctly. And if we think about, let's go back to feedback, for example, an organization could, because they want to reduce variation, they say managers have to meet with their subordinates once a week, get direct feedback. There has to be official quarterly reviews, annual reviews that tie into salary, bonuses, commission, whatever. And they could really standardize all of that, which maybe it doesn't need to be standardized to that level. Maybe it's, okay, you need to have one-on-ones at least on a monthly basis. You need, I think there can be flexibility on, yes, these things have to happen, the frequency in which they happen. Like at my company, a lot of folks have monthly one-on-ones with their managers. I have bi-weekly. Every 2 weeks I meet with my manager. That's just what works best with me. I also really like my manager. He's a really good guy, so I like talking to him. But from a feedback standpoint, it works out better for me to get feedback in smaller chunks more frequently. I think there's a lot that, if variability is scary for an organization, okay, fair. How can you still standardize just enough to check the boxes, but leave some variability that can work both for the organization as well as the individuals?
What you've just described there, that's not easy, but you have to, I think what some people do, some people kind of defer to it's easier if we just have a one-size-fits-all policy. That's the easiest thing in the world to administer, right? But you kind of have to accept the work of having to balance, right? Of having to go where is the right place for this? And you're not always going to get it right. And that can be a bit scary. But I think there's a lot more to be gained from doing that than just saying, that's the process. Everyone's got to get with it or leave.
And it goes back to it takes a little bit more time up front.
Fred, how do you see, AI is a huge right now, massive buzzword, huge things happening. How do you see this affecting the workplace in the future for neurodivergent, good or bad? And how is it already affecting your workflows in ways now, and or if you are utilizing it?
I find it very, very easy to generate ideas.
Mm-hmm.
What I find a little bit more challenging sometimes is kind of focusing those ideas into something that's really actionable and something that somebody else can kind of interact with. So I find AI super, super useful for me to just kind of start from this really big, amorphous place and get to something much more focused. I also find it incredibly useful for basically learning things in the way that I learn things. So if someone sends me an email, if someone sends me a document, I basically get ChatGPT to translate it into terms and languages and concepts that I can more easily understand. And I quite often find myself saying, can you explain this to me using very simple language?
We
and
do.
Use
A 10th grader. I use 10th
say explain
grader.
this to an 11th grader will understand.
So I find it super useful. I think there's amazing potential for this to help people in the workplace and possibly in schools as well. Because the reality is that everybody is so different in how they experience and how they learn and how they communicate and how they process. And of course, it is hard. It is hard to teach millions of children, to think how do we, one teacher to say, I've got this class of 30 people. How do I give them the information, whether they're all very different? How do I make sure they all learn? And I think there is this possibility of AI being able to help individuals learn in the way that they learn best without it being this unbelievably kind of onerous and time-consuming process for the educators or for the organization.
I think also too, well, for myself, I'm currently studying project management. And when I discovered how, what it takes, like the bones of a project manager, right? Like back just a few years ago, if you were not essentially an engineer in a place where you could code and have that engineering mindset, it wasn't going to be a place where you're successful. And I think in terms of how roles are shifting and what kind of people we will be bringing into said roles, I think this is how AI will change that, because we need the connectors, we need the communicators, those people that have, those interpersonal skills, right? Whereas before, these people leading these projects, they may have been, thinking with one side of their brain versus someone who could see it more as a whole. And I think in that, my hopes is very positive that, there will be no love lost, no job loss there, just only ways that we can reinvent and bring people into a space where it is more inclusive and, really working towards the mission, Fred, that you and Andy are already on top of.
I wanted to take a moment, Fred, and kind of give you the podium to share or say anything you want about the work you're doing at Irregular that you haven't already shared.
So we have this kind of big goal that we want to make work more accepting of cognitive variation, cognitive diversity, neurodiversity. We want organizations to make better use of it. That's the big goal. It's not all about just, accommodate us, let us in. It's like, make better use of this, and it'll be beneficial for everybody. But the way we actually work that's a very big thing to do. But the good thing is that you can start very, very, very small. You can start by just focusing on one aspect of your workplace. You could focus on something like how we communicate with people, or how we measure performance, how we onboard people, even how we recruit, like how we write our job specs, how we run our interview processes. But it could also be something where you look at one particular team. Like there could be a manager. It's like, I want to look at how my design team is working, or I want to look at how my sales team is operating. And it becomes a little bit more holistic, but focused on a kind of smaller area. So that's kind of how we've started to work with people. We're not quite yet going in and doing kind of big audits of workplaces, although that is something we're kind of working towards. We're going in and working on one particular thing, and it's very much to do with, we're really integrating what are the goals of your business, right? Aside from anything that's happening here, what is your business trying to do? And what obstacles is your business facing? And where might we be able to make some changes to make a part of your business more flexible, right? Make a part of your business more innovative or productive or resilient through using the neurodivergent lens. That's the kind of people that we're looking to connect with, like people that work for companies where they think that things are a little bit rigid, things don't seem to be flowing as well as they could.
You're doing the hard job right now of changing the mindset, and because it's not just changing the process that's written on paper, it's changing the mindset of everybody who touches that process or is touched by that process. So it's not just going in and saying, okay, well, instead of, having this interviewee or this candidate have to do this case study, it's okay, you should make sure. Same with job descriptions, like making sure that it's written in a specific way that's clear and understandable, making sure it's shared ahead of time so somebody isn't put on the spot and their brain shuts down, they can't think of the answer, and getting everybody who's touched by that process on the same page. That's hard. That is hard, and you and Andy are doing amazing things, and I hope. No, let's be more positive than that. I know that you will be able to do great work other people will start seeing the great work that you're doing, and hopefully it will spread like a spider web and touch other organizations that you're working directly with or not working directly with, but there's, they start hearing and seeing the benefits of the great things that you're doing.
I think something really big you said just then was that you guys are focusing on making small changes, small steps. I've been told a lot that another expression, I'm not able to sometimes see the forest through the trees.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that focusing, and for me, I am a big picture person. I think of the big picture, and then I get lost in translation a lot. Sean knows. He said, that's for the backlog, Victoria. And I think that's a great idea. That's for the backlog. But I think back to speak to that it's the small things that are going to make a difference here. And we're not asking for a complete flip the script overnight, like no one's coming over to, shake things up, but, just that small effort, that cost benefit, back to what we were talking about earlier is huge. The payout is big.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, because, it sounds like you guys have got perhaps a similar dynamic to myself and Andy, where he's very, very good at getting it done. And I'm very good at coming up with the kind of ideas.
Yes.
But this is, that's instructive to how organizations can start to think. It's like, you don't need an individual to bring everything. It's in that harmony, it's in the combination of people that you bring in. That's where the magic happens.
Again, Fred, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation truly is near and dear to my heart, and I really appreciate and value you and your time and everything that you guys are doing. For all our listeners, we would love, Fred, reach out to Fred, LinkedIn, or to learn more about Irregular, go to www.irregulartraining.co.uk. We'll have the link in our show notes, as well as the link to Fred's LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed this episode today, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and visit nurturingtomorrow.org to stay connected with the foundation. Fred, it has really been an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Fred.
Thank you.